Just making sure there's no stragglers. Sometimes people call me or text me and pretty good showing. So okay. Okay, so I thought to follow up last symposium. Um, are we recording? I want to make sure it's recording. Yeah, it's recorded. So last symposium, I forgot to record it, so I had to give everybody credit for it. To follow up the last symposium on trauma-informed care, I thought we talked a little bit about what the experience is like for individuals that have been traumatized. And I think we could all relate to in some form or fashion, but of course there are levels and depths of trauma that people experience that not everyone has. So to deepen our understanding, to give us a little bit more perspective, to raise our compassion and understanding, because a lot of times the effects of trauma create difficulties with interpersonal relationships. So like I'm sure a lot of you guys know that. Yes, Sophia, we can see you. Dr. Wentz will be monitoring the chat while I try to deliver my lecture and answer any questions for Q&A. Okay, so let's get into it. And essentially what I'm going to do, I thought it's pretty, we're heavy into the semester. I'm sure a lot of you guys are feeling the weight of, assignments and research papers and everything. I am, for sure. I'm not even taking any classes. So I thought I would spend the evening kind of less from an academic perspective and more as a counselor and how I approach trauma in my work. And I'm going to use an allegory or a myth. A lot of times people think the word myth means a lie, but it really refers to a psychological truth. And if you've ever studied myth, and I had the great fortune of myths being my bedtime story. My father was taking classes at the community college at night to get his degree in hotel and business management. And one of the elective courses he took was Greek mythology. And it was always his personal fascination. And so when he'd get home from school after working all day, after studying in the evening, he would tuck me into the night and tell me these mythological tales. And they really became the foundation of a lot of my work and deeper understanding of psychological phenomenon and expression in pathology. I think there's a lot of wisdom in these, and it's not really tapped into. Peter Levine's work on trauma, he talks a little bit about using myth, or he uses mythological concepts. I think he uses Eros as one, and psyche. And tonight's, we'll get into that here. So you all know who I am. I'm Oscar Sita, professor and director of the Human Services Programs, and my co-host is Dr. Wentz Munoz, who's very close to becoming a professor himself. So fingers crossed, everything's going well. Okay, so I kind of saw this little blurb off the internet, and I thought it was apropos of tonight's discussion. And they said there's a stronger link between addiction and childhood trauma than obesity and diabetes. 2/3 of those addicted report being abused as children. That means the war on drugs is a war on traumatized people that need help. So we know that folks in addiction are overrepresented in statistics related to childhood abuse or abuse from a caregiver or a parent. And usually, of course, it's not a one-off thing. It is sustained abuse. So think about the developing psyche repeatedly sustaining the psychological injury through those formative years where they're developing. How do you learn? How do you develop? How do you confront your own psychological, sociological challenges in the ambience of an unsafe home? And what it does is it twists the psyche up in all kinds of different ways. And then we have names for pathologies that what it does to people. But I think if we understand more deeply why they're responding this way, it'll be a clue onto how we can help ameliorate those symptoms. Even though modern research in a lot of areas believe that those symptoms are lifelong. I don't believe that, but I think we just need a different approach. Okay, so we're all on the same page, and we're talking. We're going to use similar terms here. I thought it would be a good idea to define psychological trauma as the emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial can be typical. Long-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives. Okay, so I almost gave away the plot here. So I was going to use the myth of Medusa to illustrate trauma, because I think it's one that a lot of us are familiar with. Does anybody remember the myth of Medusa and what was her attributes? I haven't given this lecture for a while, so let's see if I remember. Anybody? She was beautiful. Oh, snakes for hair, yeah, turned men into stone. Yep, goddess was jealous of her beauty. After the curse, after the curse, she was transformed. So Medusa was a priestess in the temple of Athena, and she was pursued by Poseidon. So here's an image depicting Poseidon pursuing her, and she was terrified of him, as he's the god of the sea, and he eventually overcame her and violated her, sexually raped her. And so this transgression angered Athena, and for the desecration of her temple. Also, she was very jealous of the fact that Medusa's beauty, she was a sister of three called the Gorgons, caught the eye of this god. And so she cursed Medusa and transforming her into the image that we're all familiar with. So from the priestess, the chaste priestess, I might add, into the Gorgon or the Medusa. And so, of course, this curse and these attributes, she goes into seclusion. She becomes, she lives in a cave by herself. People are terrified of her. Her gaze will turn people into stone. And I want you to think about what happens when the innocence of life is corrupted by an insult like rape to the psyche. Not just the physical body, which is profound enough, and it can have lasting effects aside from the initial violation, but then the psychological. And people feel profoundly changed by the experience. They never feel the same. And then, so if we use this image as our understanding of the destruction of this beautiful young girl into what she might feel like afterwards, like somebody might feel, and we can use any kind of really detrimental traumatic experience as the causal factor. So snakes for hair, nobody can look at her. And this is this isolation that people might feel after they have been violated, right? They can't speak about it. They don't talk to anybody. They isolate themselves psychologically. There's a physical one in this story. And here's a depiction of a bust of Medusa, I think by an American artist around the 18th century, mid 18th century, American girl from Massachusetts. And she looks very sad, forlorn. Here's another one. And here's a quote by Harrison that states that the Medusa was made out of the terror, not the terror out of the Gorgon. So while she's depicted as this terrible being, it was the terror that created her, so to say. And when you think about victim blaming, oftentimes people who suffered childhood abuse or sexual abuse or rape or any matter of horrific psychological events that create this kind of trauma, there's often a reluctance to believe them sometimes, or to accept their experience and to blame them, right? Well, Celeste, hold your your evaluation of the story until we're done. Maybe it'll give you a new understanding of it, because I'm not here to victim blame anybody, of course. And there's a great book by Bessel van der Kolk called "The Body Keeps the Score," and he's a great author and academic in the field of trauma. And this is from a quote from his book. Victims are members of a society whose problems represent the memories of suffering, rage, and pain in a world that it longs to forget. And I heard an interview with him on NPR, and the interviewer read that quote. He said, "That's brilliant. Who said that?" She said, "You." So I don't feel bad about sometimes forgetting the things that I say. And I think when we think about the things that keep happening, like the injustice of war and sexual violence and murder and disempowered groups becoming prey to all manner of things, you realize from this quote why it continues to happen. We don't want to think about it too long. We don't think too long about these issues. And you can take this, and when you look at somebody who's suffering from addiction that is probably become addicted for lots of different reasons, and it's easy just to blame the person, the addict, right? The person who is consuming the drugs or behavior that's addictive or pathological, but not really think about how they got there, because that's a problem we're all culpable of, because we create the society we live in, whether we like it or not. We can blame the government. We can blame, Freud teaches you to blame your mother. The socialists teach you to blame the government, and then Adler teaches to blame yourself. And the point is, it's something happened to us. It isn't just something that we choose, in that way. We can make choices. I don't know, alleviate anybody's power of choosing, but I think we have to take in consideration the context of how human beings are the environment where they exist. Okay, so we know that a lot of personality disorders can be attributed to persistent childhood trauma. We see that in attachment disorders that grow up around that. I think this thing's out of sorry. So I wanted to talk about this first, and then get into a little bit out of order, but I'll just go back and forth. So when children grow up in an unsafe environment, or the caregiver is inconsistent, abusive, absent, neglectful, things like that, some peculiar avoidant types will emerge. And so if you have a safe home environment, a loving caregiver that gives you a lot of attention and facial gaze, which is very important, by the way. If you guys have children, it's really important to look at them in the eyes, not just be on a phone or put them on a device. It's one of the most important ways that you can make an infant feel safe, is by looking at them in the eyes, in a kind, loving way, obviously. So you can develop this secure attachment style. So this is characterized by folks who are comfortable with social interaction and intimacy. Okay, they feel they can trust people readily, or at least until they give them cause not to, and they can distinguish the difference between somebody who is trustworthy and somebody who isn't. And then, of course, folks who sustain, or children who sustain, these abusive of caregiving experiences can become ambivalent or resistant, insecure style. So they both seek and reject intimacy and social interaction. So they'll go up and down. It's inconsistent. And then there's avoidant insecure attachment style, who tend to avoid intimacy and social interaction. In adulthood, these avoidance styles often split into, a diminished social connection, avoidant and or devalued, and a fearful style where people don't trust others, fear of rejection. When you see these attachment styles mature, they turn into borderline personality disorder or narcissism, or both. Sometimes people have both. And when you look at some of the symptoms here, problem regulating emotions and thoughts, impulsive and reckless behavior, unstable relationships with other people, more likely to be the victims of violence, including rape and other crimes. And one of the reasons is they have trouble distinguishing. They disassociate a lot, so they can be taken advantage of, folks. And when I mean disassociate, you're not there. You go somewhere else when you feel threatened or unsafe. You have borderline personality is more a reality disorder. I think that's a better way of putting it, because your reality is overlaid with this filter that you put on it, and it makes you misunderstand object relations with other people. So a lot of times they might appear really naive, even though they have a lot of life experience. They don't gauge certain people's intentions correctly. People who want to help them, they might see as threatening or violent, and other people who are mean to do them harm and take advantage of them, they might perceive as safe or reliable. So this is when you think about what this does to the individual as they mature. We go back to our image of Medusa and think of this trauma, this monster that's created, is the psychic reflection of that experience. And sorry, I didn't mean to shut you guys down. You can still make comments. I just didn't want you, Celeste, to come up with an opinion just yet. Okay. And these are folks with a history of substance abuse. 81% of subjects traumatic history, 71% physical abuse, 68% sexual abuse, and then 62% witnessing serious domestic violence. And then there's other factors like low social support, low SES, low socioeconomic status, lower intelligence from lack of access to education, and then a family history of illness or substance abuse. So you can see how these things all culminate on the individual. Yeah. Are they aware of it? No. I mean, are they aware of these statistics? Some of them might be if they've gone to treatment, but I think a lot of times clinicians who aren't trained in trauma-informed care and don't know this stuff don't realize it. So they might just take it from a mental health perspective, not realize some of the other underlying causes. The reality distortions. It's something that it should be approached in counseling. I would say a lot of times borderline personality is misdiagnosed as bipolar, so they don't get accurate treatment, and they also medicate it, so people just, instead of reacting, they're kind of muted. But folks who really decide to get into it, there are some therapeutic protocols that can be useful, but I think if you don't have a strong connection to the therapist where you can start to rebuild that level of trust, and they're gonna lash out at you, they're gonna go up and down. So one of the ways thinking about borderline is I love you, I hate you, don't leave me. So they have a lot of really insecure attachments, so they can go from idolizing you to vilifying you, and that can go the same be true for their therapist. But they do have the ability to reality test in most cases. But the term borderline is on the border of neurosis and psychosis. So sometimes when they have a strong emotional reaction or a life crisis, or they're intoxicated from drug alcohol abuse, or a psychological condition like bipolar, they will begin to hallucinate and have really strong delusions. This isn't true for all. I want you to think about borderline as a continuum, just like other diseases where there's like a mild, moderate, and severe. And it's just like other personality disorders like narcissism. Okay, some more stats on BPD. High spikes of anger, physical symptoms like feeling sick or somatic symptoms, depression, psychosis. 42% of patients treated with reach a level of adjustment beyond their previous maximum level. So there is hope for that. Okay. So it's important to bring in intimate partners or family members in treatment too. So when they're rebuilding those connections, they can do it in the context of therapy. That can be really helpful because they might start to trust the therapist, but not anybody else. Okay. So we can see what happens to folks that have gone through these traumatic experiences, and now what's the road to healing? And I'm going to continue on with the myth in order to articulate that. Any questions that are going on? Oh, this right here, Christine. Let's try and do that at components. Is that a question or a statement, Christine? I don't think there's a strong genetic component. I think they might have another disorder that is. No, I was just asking to clarify. And there might be some kind of psychotic disorder that is prevalent in first order relatives in the family, but I don't know. There could be a lot of different reasons. That's the way. At least I don't know that. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at those genetic statistics in a while. They might have changed. Yeah. So a person, okay, think about your own personality. Your own personality is a way of coping with the world. So we create, a child is born. A baby does not have an ego yet. It starts to develop an ego out of what's okay and what's not okay within the environment. So it's getting signals, social signals from the parents. It's getting models from the family members. And then there's what Jung calls the archetype. The archetypal models. That means that we have a collection in our subconscious of images that help us construct personality types that exist in the world. That there's going to exist a king and a queen and a leader and a fairy and all kinds of different images that you could say is part of our biological nature that help us interact and understand the world. So we build this personality. Well, in an insecure environment, the way of them coping is the best way for them to think about somebody who's in prison. They might have these similar traits, right? Because it's a very unsafe environment. They might be friendly and then very violent and seemingly unpredictable. But if you understood this dynamic of the prison world, it might seem very adaptable. But then when you come out of that environment, it's not adaptable anymore. Yes, absolutely. That was the correlation I was trying to make, that childhood trauma does lead to borderline personality disorder in adults. Not all cases, but in a lot of times it can, especially if it's sustained. So to the trauma. Yeah. So some of the symptoms are they depersonalize, they derealize, they disassociate. And so, yeah, because of the traumatic experience, they learn when you can't escape some place because you're like a child and powerless, you escape psychologically through depersonalization, derealization, and disassociation. Anybody, if I mention any terms you people aren't familiar with, just let me know. I kind of take it for granted you are, but okay. So continue on here with our mythic journey. So there's a king that fell in love with Perseus's mother, and Perseus is kind of protective of his mother. So Polydectes sends him on a mission. He says, I challenge you to slay Medusa. This is this monster that now exists in the ancient Greek world of myth. And so he accepts this quest and he goes to Athena for help. He says, this is his patron goddess, and he asks her for guidance and aid. And so she bestows upon him a shield that has a mirror finish on the back, on the front. And she warns Perseus not to attack Medusa head on, that you have to kind of use the reflection of the shield so you don't look at her, and then strike her a killing blow through the. And this is a method of how we're going to treat trauma, right? We remember Medusa represents trauma personified, right? And then the method, the shield in this case, that comes from the goddess of love, compassion, is you don't want, because a lot of times people will say, okay, you were traumatized and you got all these problems here. Tell me about it. That's not how you approach it, right? You don't want to go into the trauma. They can't, if they could just talk about it and discuss it, they would. A lot of times these things they're not able to even allow themselves to re-experience, because it's re-traumatizing just to relive it. So they're buried, their memory is fragmented. There's a lot of misunderstanding of cues and social interactions, and this continued insult carries on through their personality and their interaction that robs them of intimacy. It robs them of peace and tranquility and growth and feeling protected and safe. All these things that this initial insult did to them. So we're going to indirectly come at trauma. We're not going to, and one of the ways that we'll do that is teaching people, one, how to calm themselves down, how to be tranquil. And we might do that through breathing exercises or yoga or body rolfing, all kinds of different, what we call grounding techniques that people can utilize to control their physiological response to things, because they're overreacting, just like those PTSD symptoms. They're hypervigilant, they're suspicious, they're mistrustful. So learning to trust their own body and learning to trust the signals from their body. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Levine's work and body processes. And so this is what in trauma-informed care we want to start here. Like, let's not go into the trauma yet. In time, when they're ready, you'll have an opportunity for that. Everybody following me so far? Is this clear? Well, I'm kind of jumping around, but hopefully, if you don't understand something, please just ask questions. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Perseus, through some effort and loss of some men, finally vanquishes Medusa and removes her head that has been promised, as part of his errand, and he later gifts it to Athena. But remember, Medusa was raped by a god, and so inside her, she was impregnated with these demigods, Pegasus and the golden warrior Chrysaor. And these are depicted here. And Pegasus, well, if you vanquish trauma, if you overcome it, it offers you two things and two ways of healing. Is it freedom from your past, which is represented by the wings of Pegasus, and the golden warrior Chrysaor. I hope I'm saying that right. And he represents truth, because in within the mind of a traumatized individual, often the memory is incorrect. So Levine focuses a lot on that, going back and filling in the blanks. Sometimes they'll yeah, clash of times. Yeah, absolutely. It was a favorite of mine when I was a kid, so you know where I'm going with this, Michelle. Um, it's a little bit different when you read it, and through through some mythic text, but they get the point there. I think a little bit more on the hero's journey than the way I'm using it, but it's all good. So, and then from these two mythical beings emerge. They're twins, and then they're demigods too. They're the children of Poseidon and Medusa. And I think when you are working with trauma, you recognize that the truth of this individual's experience has been disassembled and fragmented. And so putting the pieces back together into a narrative that is useful for them, and we call this meaning making in late stages of trauma, where people make meaning out of their experience. Doesn't mean they're going to like what happened to them, but they find some utility into their experience. They said, it made me stronger in some ways. I now understand things in a different way. I'm more compassionate toward myself, whatever. There's all kinds of really prolific experiences that can happen when people overcome their traumatic experiences. Okay. And then from the body of Medusa, Perseus collects two vials of blood, one from the left side and one from the right side. And the blood of Medusa has the same blood has a healing factor, and the other one can kill. And even the healing one can bring back people from the dead. So when sometimes people have lost their lives or their personal sense of self through the traumatic experience and the loss, they can regain it from we're using this as a metaphor, the death of the traumatic being, the personified being. But if it's not, it can kill you. And we see this all the time too. When people engage in reckless behavior, drug addiction, things like that, just to try to drown out those traumatic symptoms. Also, people who have experienced childhood trauma have a higher incidence of physical ailments and medical problems and disease, diabetes, arthritis, you name it, cancer, everything, you name it. And in some of the ACEs studies, you'll see that vetted out. I don't know if we got into that in any of our courses yet, but those are really, when you read some of that stuff, you recognize how profound this level of trauma is. Yeah, well, at least they're keeping it alive, even if it's in a video game. I've heard of it. That's a good game my friend plays, but I don't have time to play video games. Actually, my computer's probably too old. And I only have a PlayStation 2, or 3. Number 3. Okay. And later, when Perseus returns, he gives the head of Medusa and offers it to Athena, and she places it on her shield, her famous shield. The name Aegis. Somebody's calling me. It's probably one of his students, but I'm not going to answer right now. And then Athena gifts the blood to the goddess of healing and medicine, Asclepius. And you can see his staff depicted here with the single serpent. And the idea here, this is the healing knowledge, right, that we can provide to our patients. And that's what I'm offering you in this story here. Because we can get into the techniques and the ways that we can do this. But if you don't have a basic understanding of how the individual got to where they're at, what kind of care and consideration is needed in the process, you're going to misapply those techniques and those interventions. And I see it time and time again, people telling me, I was working with psychologists for years, I didn't get anywhere. And then I'm like, well, what did you do? Like, well, he just had, want to talk about my trauma or try to hypnotize me, all these kinds of things, but that activate the individual's defensive systems, so they don't get anywhere. They just lock that that poison inside them longer and longer, finding a way that they can release it in a way that is not going to kill them. And to make a point here, this is a depiction of Asclepius, the god of healing. he has a single staff with a single serpent, right? But oftentimes, and this is the staff of medicine. This is the symbol for medicine. And we'll see this one, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is you see this on ambulances and doctors' offices and doctors' cards." But this is the staff of Caduceus, who is the messenger of the gods, the god of lots of different things. But one of them is he is the soul guide. He guides people into the underworld. He guides the soul through our lifetime. The idea is that our soul is being guided through our lifetime, and this is our symbol, the symbol of our education, our training, our domain, you could say. So I don't like it when it's misapplied in medicine, because it's a completely different symbol and it has a different meaning behind it. And I think symbols are really important.
I think it's also, Mr. Cyril, very important to point out that this symbol, the snake itself, the venom is contained within the snake, and there is the snake itself, the one that can provide the antidote to make you feel better. If you really think about it, individuals that have been traumatized, the antidote is actually within them. You, as a healer, a future healer, will be a facilitator for them to encounter that path that will allow them to feel better. All the techniques will be there for you to use, but it eventually, and at the end of the day, is the individual, him, her, or themselves abilities to cope with that and to feel better that truly will take them to the place that they want to be. So the symbolism is very important because it is within the same element that causes the damage, although in the trauma could be an external one, but the answer is contained within the individual. The great work that we do as healers, as counselors, as therapists, is actually facilitating that process in which you walk along your client to find that power that they have, to recode and encode and relearn the story in a different way so that they can feel better. So I think it's beautiful to think about the snake as the one that possesses the venom and the one that can actually provide the antidote, because it is through the snake that the scientists find that antidote. So very important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then I think we can also analogize the hero, Perseus, as the individual going into their own say trauma, so to say, and confronting it and vanquishing it. They're the individuals. As the healer, as Dr. Wen said, and that's what we are. We are healers. We assist them as guides. We do not do for them. We can't do for them. The experience won't work. Now, there is something that happens within. I was trying to get to this image here to think about the heroic attitude you have to take to want to overcome your own trauma, right? It's not an easy thing. A lot of times when people come into my office, I say that this is one of the bravest things you've ever done, and I thank you for being here. You honor me with the experience of being part of your journey, because that's what it is. They're going on a journey and you're accompanying them. That's what therapy is in a lot of ways. And there's other things that therapy can be used for, but this is one experience. I'm glad to hear that, Michelle. I think these are things that I use in my own understanding, and I want to share them with students, and I've done presentations on this and other trainings, because I think sometimes we get so lost in the scientific research and things like that, we forget the person that we're trying to heal and how human they are. And these are really human stories that we all experience. Presley's asking about whether exposure therapies can be helpful for individuals. They can be if they're used at the right time and the individual has the right tools to confront some of the fears that they might experience as a result of the trauma. I think you want to think about all the different kinds of tools we have. It's just like a carpenter or some kind of artist would use the right tool for the job, and it's also handled skillfully, right? So a lot of times, folks who don't have a lot of experience with with some of these interventions do it in kind of a clumsy fashion. Like one of the ones that is often used for borderline is DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. So really trying to get people to take responsibility for their reactions, reality tests, all kinds of different skills that they might have deficits in. But every time I've ever seen it done, it's usually in a group setting where people are very vulnerable. They might not trust the group yet. So a lot of these skills are not picked up that well. Yeah, and it's true. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Wentz that exposure therapy, it's not really used that much, but there are times in the stages of trauma where you will confront the experience. It doesn't have to necessarily like bring a picture of the person or something like that, or make them confront the individual. It can be more symbolic, because everything we experience in the mind is symbolic. We basically we invent our reality based upon our senses and our experience. It's not a direct experience, so to say. It's interpreted by the mind, and thus our psychology.
I think it's very important, Mr. Sita, to remind everyone the tools that you learn from any framework or any new method that has been researched and that has been given to you. Maybe the most wonderful research people has done and conducted in society. But one of the things that you always want to keep in mind is that your client or whoever is working with you is extremely unique. His, her, or their experience are unique. One of the first things that you will need to do is to get to know your client and then understand whether a specific tools will be useful for that particular client. Oftentimes, now the EMDR came out, oftentimes we have individuals that says, I want EMDR and I don't care about anything else. When as a matter of fact, EMDR may be useful for some people, and although it has been worldly research and is accepted in the entire world, I have had clients that don't do good with EMDR and they don't feel anything. So it is very important that you always keep in mind your client and the uniqueness of the experience of your client. And of course, it is demanded from you as a future counselor and educated and prepared individual and trained individual to utilize your skills to understand which technique, which method, which strategy will be of the benefit of your client. This is when your work starts, because you got to understand the client, you got to actually be present for the narrative being given to you, and then on top of that, you got to actually understand the tools being given to you and see which one will be of benefit. Oftentimes, I'm not gonna lie, in the process of understanding that, we do error and trial, which is not bad. But I will rather have you do an error and trial with an educated guest than just solely saying, exposure therapy, let's do that. You got to understand your client, because understanding your client will formulate a powerful working alliance that will sustain the relationship. In case that the error in trial didn't work, they don't leave you or they ended up more traumatized. The relationship will be able to sustain that. But it is very important for you to get to know your client. So I will invite everyone to keep away from, I'm just going to learn the technique and this is what I'm going to give. Instead, I want to learn my client, understand my client, and see if any of my tools under my belt will work. If not, then there will be other professionals with other tools that can be of benefit. So be aware of that.
Yeah, EMDR, when I took the training, it was touted as the cure-all to trauma. It's the most recognized form of therapy for the Veterans Association or Veteran Affairs, VA, excuse me. And well, after I was trained in it, you kind of got this confidence, like, wow, it does everything, and the training will tell you it does everything to do it. They'll show you a lot of research to back it up. And the reality is, 20, 30 years later, EMDR hasn't solved all the problems with trauma. Otherwise, we wouldn't have them. And they have they have EMDR for kids, and they have EMDR for people who make cupcakes on Wednesdays. They have all kinds of very specific. And I'll tell you one thing I don't like about EMDR, that it's a proprietary treatment method. And so it's the training is and you can't teach it in a college. You can't, we can't teach you that technique without being sanctioned by one of the two EMDR groups that took that research that from public institutions, because Shapiro I think she was at UCLA, a professor and researcher there, and then turned it into this proprietary intervention. So I have used it. I find it can be very useful, but I echo the sentiments of Dr. Wentz that it depends on the client. Carl Jung said that every individual is so unique that they require their own unique form of psychotherapy that has to be invented for them. So listening to your client, understanding what they need in the moment by just observing them in this vulnerable state is going to be the way to get them to health and well-being that they're looking for. And with that, I guess I thought I was going to take more time with this, but it went quicker than I thought. So, of course, I'd be glad to entertain any questions. Of course, Dr. Wentz and I are both very knowledgeable about trauma interventions and therapy of just about anything you want to talk about. Any questions? You can raise your hand, or if you want to. You want to take this question from Trini, Dr. Wentz?
Sure, Trini. It's interesting because it sounds like the whole point for you is to get to the root of the problem. If you really think about it, the point of therapy is what the client wants to make the point of therapy. So maybe the client is not ready to go to the root cause of the challenge. Although we as professionals do want to do that, once again, you got to be very attentive to see whether the client wants to go to the root cause of the problem. They may come to you and, work on, I don't know, finances, when as a matter of fact, there may be a gambling problem. But they come to you to work with finances through the process and through the guidance and listening and understanding and presence. You may get to that point. But to say that I'm going to be there to get to the root cause is actually utilizing an idea a priori, which is yours as a therapist. And I always invite new counselors, future counselors, to actually allow the clients to tell you, this is what I'm coming from, but through the process, if we get to a certain point, beautiful. But if we don't, because the client doesn't want to, then we may go months and months through different sessions without actually getting to the root cause because the client doesn't want to touch it. So keep in mind that we are going to walk by the side of the client. Yes, of course, it's hope and expected that you as professional will begin actually shedding light on the individual's challenges. But there will be clients that will be like, no, I don't want to talk about that one. So let's change that topic. And we got to actually go with the client. But yes, indeed, in our heart, we do want to get to the root cause. but don't let that idea interfere with the goal and the client's desire for therapy. So, which could be different from your own goal and professional belief.
Yeah, and to answer this next question, but before about whether we should bring up the trauma, there's an old saying, but I think it was Rollo May. This is if all you have is a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. So using a therapeutic approach that we are comfortable with or we're used to, and you'll see this early on when clinicians get into the field. As soon as they're out of their graduate school, they will always try to do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because it's one that's very practical. It has a protocol. You do it in order, and it's easy to understand, and it doesn't take a lot of. So they'll try to hit everybody over the head with CBT. That's what I say, and it doesn't always. It doesn't always, it's not helpful to the client, as Dr. Wentz mentioned. So, and then to go back into this other question about, and thank you guys for all the nice comments. I really do appreciate that. How to ask, should the therapist ask the client if they have gone through trauma or wait until the client brings it up? So in our initial assessment, we'll have asked these questions. And then we'll ask them, usually a good clinician, why are you here? What do you like to work on? And they might tell you. And then through your experience with them, you might say, I think that, you might start to develop a prognosis that the trauma is affecting them. They might not recognize it's not always that obvious. And there's deeper issues, especially when things don't change. Robert asked about smash rooms. So as a clinician, I don't know, unless there's any research. But there might be things that people need to express that sometimes people get from engaging in that kind of behavior.
Virginia, a great question. I'm going to tell you, this is what we call continuous trauma. This is a new way for us, actually, clinicians, to begin looking at what do we do with individuals that had been traumatized or had experienced trauma, but still yet they are in the process of experiencing it. Will our treatment actually support them? Is there something we can do for them when they are constantly re-experiencing the trauma? In other words, trauma hasn't stopped yet. What do we do? How do we support them? It's a fascinating topic because counseling, if you really think about it, it's a very novice and new field. We continue to try to understand the human experience and actually come up with methods to utilize and help other people that are constantly being traumatized, or even when they are in the process of. As you mentioned, in the process of Israel and Hamas, it's an ongoing trauma happening. So it's a great question, because I don't know what can we do when the individual is 24/7 being traumatized or experiencing bombing constantly. Just imagine for a second being in that moment and every second and every day of your life for days and weeks. Imagine what will that do to your brain and to the adaptable positive memories that your brain can generate to support your psychological well-being. You are in a constant mode of survival. And so, great question, Madison. I don't think I have a great answer for you, but it is something that it's happening and that we are looking into.
Yeah, so there's no way to avoid trauma. Unless we change the a priori nature of the human experience. So we would be in another reality, right? So it's going to happen. We have ways of healing it, but I believe that there is a reason that we experience trauma, and we, as humans, we have this experience of helping each other. We go through life helping each other through our experiences. we find meaning and closeness and community and brotherhood and sisterhood through these trying events. And I don't think we'd want to take that away from people, because it's how we're wired. We're literally wired for stress, and our whole system responds to it and creates adaptive ways of overcoming it. So I don't think the idea is to stop terrible things in the world. Not, at least not from a therapist perspective. Maybe like if you wanted to engineer another reality where pain doesn't exist or something like that. But I think if human beings are biological, we're psychological, and we're spiritual. And there's a spiritual dimension that is very important. I haven't really got into that because I haven't got into the specific ways that I would treat this. I was just giving an overview so we have an understanding. And I hope these images, and I think that the natural language of the psychology of the psyche is images. And that's why we dream in images, and we have very vivid dreams and have all these experiences, because it's talking to us, and our subconscious does, and our consciousness does respond to myth and imagery in this way. And so my hope is that these images really get into the essence of what you're doing and what's happened to these individuals. Yeah, okay, getting back to trying to get, there's a lot of questions there. Virginia asks, how can we as future counselors treat children? Well, there are specific I guess methods and training for children, like sand tray, play therapy, and things like that. But we also want to consider the cultural context and the history of individuals. You don't, so I'll give you an example. And does anybody remember, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, there was, in West Africa, there was this genocide between these different groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. And, you know, hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And so the UN and the WHO sent a bunch of therapists that are trained kind of in a Western psychological sense to do therapy with all these folks and try to help them through this time in, you know, in their shared history, their cultural history. And nobody wanted to talk to the therapist. And they said, well, what's the issue? And they said, well, they just want to take us into little rooms and talk about all the bad things that happen. And when we heal somebody in our community, we put them in the middle of the center of our village, and we surround them, and we sing, and we say beautiful things, and we put our hands on them. And that's our method of healing. So, you know, Israel and Palestinian people have a different cultural perspective. And the last thing I want to do is try to, you know, impose that on any kind of different cultural system that may not be compatible with. It may be adaptable, and you can just learn enough about the culture and make it useful. Yeah, Rwanda, excuse me. So I want to honor, thank you, Rose, for sharing your experience, and I'm really sorry to hear that. The best advice I could give you is to seek some treatment if it's available. And yeah, domestic violence can be a terrific experience and cause symptoms of acute trauma, and can also develop into post-traumatic stress if it's not treated or if it doesn't resolve. And I don't want everyone to think just because you had experienced trauma that you're going to develop PTSD or borderline. That isn't necessarily the case. Okay, great. Yeah, I appreciate that word, Virginia. Compassion for each other is you know, that we need in magnitudes of to help our society. That's all that it's going to take. I was actually, I don't know, I was talking to somebody student, I don't think they're here, and they were talking about how they're working in a treatment agency, and the folks working there said they couldn't figure out why this individual worked for in a substance abuse center if they hadn't experienced an addiction. And it didn't dawn on them that they, out of compassion to help another human being, not necessarily having had gone through it yourself, is enough impetus to dedicate your life to helping people. So, because I know, okay, so when it comes to traumatic experience, people will repress those memories. How do therapists go about? So I'm not sure if I understand the question here, Trini. How do we work with repressed memories? That, if that's the question. So the mind has its own system of healing, just like the body does. So we want to, just like doctors will work with the body's immune system, we want to work with the mind's natural ability to heal itself. So if the mind is, you say, repressed, and those memories are being, what I would say, contained. They're being compartmentalized so the person can function. So if they were, just on the surface and they're reliving it, that can be really detrimental to their psychological well-being. And just like if you, I don't know if anybody, maybe not, but when people have, before they had treatment for tuberculosis, the body would encapsulate the cells in calcium. And so a lot of times you do x-rays on people that had been exposed to tuberculosis. My dad did when he was younger. And you could see these white spots in his lungs. And those are calcium deposits that basically trapped the virus before, they had treatment. But what happens as they age, the body might take back that calcium that it needs for the bones and stuff. And then there's a flare up of tuberculosis. So just keeping that idea in mind, where the mind's encapsulating this memory and compartmentalizing it away from the ego construct so that it can continue to function. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's better than not. Yeah. Yeah, Dory. Thanks for sharing that. Hopefully I answered your question, Trini. Yeah. Folks used to tell me that too. And I'm like, well, if everybody who became addicted to drugs and alcohol wanted to be a counselor, then we'd be in good shape. But just like a doctor doesn't have to have gone through a heart attack or brain lesion to treat somebody, we don't have to have experienced the disorder, and if we take on the disease model that addiction is a disease, a mental disease, not a physiological disease, but it's more like a virus, like a computer virus of the mind, and the kind of functions of the mind. We don't. They're not going to get there. So one of the things that had happened, I didn't understand this at first, is when you work with folks that have an addiction recovery, they have so much shame and guilt about their experiences, sometimes things that they did, and they feel like if we're not part of the recovery community, we're not going to understand it and we're going to judge them, that we're not like them. This is an old way of thinking. A lot of it comes from the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous field, or peer recovery groups, but it's not true. Well, we use research and scholarship to inform our care, and you don't have to suffer from an addiction to be able to treat it. A lot of times people they'll challenge you, and really what they're saying is, I don't trust you just yet, and just give them an opportunity for them to trust you, and let them know that you're well intentioned, that you're compassionate, you're understanding, you're not judgmental, all those preconditions that we would offer our clients. That way they can. And now here's another problem: is a lot of people who, as we've seen, are overrepresented from other issues related to addiction, think their only problem was the addiction, but in a lot of cases, it's a symptom of other disorders. So they might be in recovery and abstain, but they still have the underlying psychological condition that led them to use and abuse drugs, or alcohol, or gambling, sex, whatever, to a pathological degree. And they, I mean, some people, they talk about AA more than anything. Like, it's almost like they're addicted to AA. I AA can help and has helped a lot of people, but it's not treatment. We don't want to confuse the two. One's a peer recovery support group, and clinical treatment is different. They might have similar aims for the individual to obtain health and well-being, but yeah. Sometimes we're motivated to help because we don't want people to keep people allowing this plague to destroy our society, right? Yeah, attached. Yeah, I mean, we want to be compassionate. I think compassion is a way of love, is expressing love in a detached way. We're not, attached to this person. There's no kind of, if you don't see them, you get upset. But there's a way of approaching the client with compassion and in detachment too. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's like holding a rose or a butterfly. You don't want to hold on to it, right? You just want to kind of cradle it with your hands so you don't destroy it, and let it be free to do its own thing. So you're not influencing the relationship with your disapproval or approval, because the two things can be detrimental either way. Thank you for all the questions. I do appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff. It's my one of my favorite things. So, and I love having a captive audience that's interested, and I do appreciate all the work you guys are doing this semester. I know it has been easy. There's a lot of changes going on, but I still appreciate the focused attention you guys give in these kinds of meetings, and also in your coursework. Thank you for saying that.
Mr.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Wentz.
Don't forget the keywords.
Sorry?
Don't forget the keywords.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. As we're wrapping up here, I want to give you guys the passphrase for the assignment. So, since you've attended the live session lecture, I'll just give you the passphrase, which is gobble, 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 like turkeys for Thanksgiving. You put that in your assignment, you post it. We know that you attended, and then you get the points. You don't have to write the paper. So if you came here, do not write a paper. Sometimes people do both. They'll attend the live session, and then they'll write the paper. But the paper is for folks who weren't able to make it. Maybe they have other commitments, or they're working, or whatever. And so we try to make it inclusive for everyone. With either you participate synchronously or asynchronously. Yeah. Yep. Just gobble gobble. That's exactly right, Rose. Gobble gobble gobble. Just like the turkey. Yeah, I tend to reuse it. Don't tell anybody. Sometimes I change it. Whatever occurs to me. Okay. Thank you all for attending tonight, and have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Good night.